The rope burned through Jake's calloused hands as he pulled with every ounce of strength left in his weathered 52-year-old body. Below him, 20 feet down in the murky Louisiana bayou water, a young woman thrashed desperately against the thick mud that seemed determined to claim her life. Her long black hair floated like dark silk around her terror-stricken face, and Jake could see she had maybe 30 seconds before the swamp won this deadly battle. "Hold on, miss! I'm coming down!" Jake shouted, his voice cutting through the humid evening air, thick with mosquitoes and the distant sound of bullfrogs. Without hesitation, he secured the rope around a massive cypress tree and rappelled down the muddy embankment, his worn cowboy boots finding purchase on the slippery roots. The woman's eyes met his as he reached the water's edge, and something in her gaze made his heart skip. Even in her desperate state, there was a fierce intelligence there, a strength that reminded him of his late wife Sarah. But there was no time for such thoughts now. "Can you grab my hand?" Jake extended his arm as far as he could reach. The woman struggled against the sucking mud, her movements becoming weaker with each passing second. I can't. My legs," she gasped, water lapping at her chin. Jake didn't think twice. He plunged into the murky water, feeling the immediate pull of the swamp trying to claim him too. The water was surprisingly warm, but he could feel the dangerous current beneath the surface. Using his rope as an anchor, he fought his way toward her, his heart pounding not just from exertion, but from a strange sense that this moment would change everything. "What's your name?" he asked as he reached her, wrapping one strong arm around her waist. "Ayanna," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Ayanna Blackhorse." The name hit Jake like lightning. Blackhorse. He knew that name from the local newspapers, from conversations in town. Chief Thomas Blackhorse of the Choctaw Nation. This wasn't just any woman he was saving. This was the daughter of one of the most respected Native American leaders in Louisiana. "Well, Ayanna Blackhorse, today's not your day to meet your maker," Jake said with a grim smile, tightening his grip on both her and the rope. "Hold on to me tight. We're getting out of here." As they fought their way back to solid ground, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that fate had just thrown him a curveball he never saw coming. He'd been living alone on his small ranch for 3 years since Sarah's death, keeping to himself, avoiding complications. But as he pulled this mysterious woman to safety, he sensed his quiet life was about to become anything but simple. Once they reached the muddy bank, Ayanna collapsed against him, shivering despite the warm evening. Jake noticed she was wearing what looked like traditional Native American clothing, a beautiful beaded dress that was now ruined by swamp water and mud. "What were you doing out here alone?" Jake asked gently, helping her sit against a tree trunk. "This part of the bayou is dangerous, especially after dark." Ayanna's dark eyes flashed with something between gratitude and wariness. "I was running," she admitted quietly. "There are men who want to force me into something I cannot accept. I thought I could hide in the swamp until they gave up looking." Jake felt his protective instinct surge. In his younger days, before Sarah, before the ranch, he'd been a different man. Some might have called him dangerous when it came to protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. "What kind of men?" he asked, his voice taking on a harder edge. Before Ayanna could answer, the sound of engines echoed through the trees. Powerful engines, moving fast, getting closer. Jake saw fear flash across her beautiful features. "They found me," she whispered, struggling to stand on shaking legs. Jake made a decision that would have surprised anyone who knew the quiet, reclusive rancher he'd become. Without a word, he scooped Ayanna into his arms and headed deeper into the swamp, away from the approaching vehicles. "My truck's hidden about half a mile through these trees," he said quietly. "Can you walk?" "I think so," Ayanna replied, but Jake could feel her trembling against him. As they moved through the darkening swamp, Jake found himself studying this woman who'd literally dropped into his life. Even covered in mud and swamp water, there was something regal about her, something that spoke of strength and dignity. Her hands, he noticed, were soft, but showed calluses that suggested she wasn't afraid of hard work. "Why are you helping me?" Ayana asked as they carefully navigated around a fallen log. "You don't even know me." Jake was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "My wife used to say that sometimes the universe puts people in our path for a reason. Maybe this is one of those times." "Your wife, is she... She passed 3 years ago, cancer." Jake's voice was steady, but Ayana could hear the pain that still lingered there. They reached Jake's old Ford pickup truck, hidden behind a thick stand of Spanish moss-draped trees. As he helped Ayana into the passenger seat, she caught his arm. "Jake," she said softly, having heard him introduce himself during the rescue, "those men, they're not just going to give up. By helping me, you're putting yourself in danger." Jake looked into her eyes, seeing the genuine concern there. "Miss Blackhorse, I've been in danger before. The question is, where can I take you that you'll be safe?" Ayana was quiet for a long moment. "My father, he doesn't know I ran. He thinks I'm considering the proposal that was made for my hand in marriage. If I go home now, he'll be disappointed, but he'll protect me. And if you don't go home, then by tomorrow morning, those men will assume I've rejected their offer permanently, and they'll come for both my father and me with violence." Jake started the truck, the old engine rumbling to life. "Sounds like we need to get you home then." As they drove through the winding back roads of rural Louisiana, Ayana found herself studying this unexpected savior. Jake was clearly a man who'd lived a full life. She could see it in the lines around his eyes, in the careful way he carried himself. His hands on the steering wheel were strong and scarred, the hands of someone who'd worked hard and fought harder. "The men who are after you," Jake said quietly. "What exactly do they want?" Ayana sighed, staring out at the passing landscape of moss-draped trees and distant lights from scattered farmhouses. "There's a man named Marcus Steele. He owns several casinos and claims to have government connections. He wants to marry me, but it's not about love. It's about gaining influence with my father and access to our tribal lands." "And your father?" "My father is torn. He knows Steele is dangerous, but he also knows that refusing him could bring violence to our people. He's hoping I'll find a way to accept the proposal for the greater good." Jake felt his jaw tighten. He'd encountered men like this Marcus Steele before, men who used power and intimidation to get what they wanted, regardless of who got hurt in the process. "What do you want?" he asked simply. The question seemed to surprise Ayana. "I want to choose my own path. I want to help my people, but not by sacrificing my freedom to a man who sees me as a possession." They drove in comfortable silence for several miles, each lost in their own thoughts. Jake found himself thinking about Sarah, about how she'd always encouraged him to stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult. Ayana found herself wondering about this quiet cowboy who'd risked his life for a stranger without hesitation. "Turn here," Ayana said softly, as they approached a dirt road marked by traditional Native American symbols carved into wooden posts. As they drove deeper into Choctaw territory, Jake could see the respect and care that had gone into maintaining this land. Traditional buildings stood alongside more modern structures, and everything was kept in immaculate condition. "My father will want to thank you properly," Ayana said, as they approached a large, beautiful house that blended traditional and contemporary architecture. "That's not necessary," Jake replied, but Ayana shook her head. "In our culture, saving someone's life creates a bond. You can't just drop me off and disappear." Before Jake could respond, the front door of the house opened, and a tall, dignified man stepped onto the porch. Even in the dim light, Jake could see the family resemblance, the same intelligent eyes, the same proud bearing. Chief Thomas Blackhorse's expression shifted from relief to concern as he saw his daughter's condition and noticed the stranger who'd brought her home. "Ayana," he said, his voice carrying both love and worry, "we've been searching for you." "I'm sorry, Father. I needed time to think." Chief Blackhorse's eyes moved to Jake, taking in everything from his muddy clothes to the way he stood protectively near Ayana. "And you are?" "Jake Morrison, sir. I found your daughter in some trouble down by the bayou." The chief's expression grew more serious. "What kind of trouble?" As Ayana explained what had happened, Jake found himself being studied by one of the most perceptive men he'd ever encountered. Chief Blackhorse was clearly a leader who'd learned to read people quickly and accurately. "Mr. Morrison," the chief said when Ayana finished her story, "it seems my family owes you a great debt." "No debt, sir. Anyone would have done the same." "No," Chief Blackhorse said firmly. "Not anyone would have risked their life for a stranger. Please come inside. The least we can do is offer you a meal and a chance to clean up." Jake was about to politely decline when he caught sight of headlights in the distance, moving fast along the main road that led to the reservation. "Sir," Jake said quietly, "I think we might have company coming." If you're enjoying this incredible story of courage and unexpected connections, make sure to hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments what you think Jake should do next. This is just the beginning of an amazing journey. Chief Blackhorse followed Jake's gaze, and his expression hardened. "Ayana, go inside and change clothes, quickly." "Father, I won't hide while others face danger because of me." "You'll do as I say," the chief replied firmly, but Jake could hear the love beneath the authority. As Ayana reluctantly headed inside, Chief Blackhorse turned to Jake. "Mr. Morrison, I suspect you're not just a simple rancher." Jake met the older man's eyes steadily. "I'm whatever I need to be, sir." The chief nodded slowly. "I thought as much. Those headlights belong to Marcus Steele's men. They've been circling our territory all evening, waiting for Ayana to return." "How many men are we talking about?" "Usually 4 or 5. They're armed, but they won't start shooting on tribal land unless they're desperate. Bad for business." Jake considered this information. "What's your plan?" "Talk first. But if talking doesn't work..." Chief Blackhorse gestured toward the house, and Jake caught a glimpse of several other men positioning themselves strategically around the property. "Your people are ready for trouble. We've been ready since Steele first made his intentions known, but having you here changes things. They saw your truck. They'll want to know who you are and why you're involved." The vehicles were getting closer now, 3 black SUVs moving in formation. Jake could feel his old instincts kicking in, the ones he'd tried to bury after Sarah's death. "Chief Blackhorse, with your permission, I'd like to stay and see this through." The older man studied Jake for a long moment. "Why? You've done your good deed. You could leave now and never look back." Jake thought about that question, thought about the quiet life he'd been living, thought about Sarah and what she would have wanted him to do. But mostly, he thought about Ayana's eyes when she'd asked him why he was helping her. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply. Chief Blackhorse smiled for the first time since Jake had arrived. "Sarah was a wise woman." Jake looked at him in surprise. "How did you—" "You mentioned her name in the truck, and you have the look of a man who's lost someone important but still carries their values." The SUVs pulled into the circular driveway, their headlights creating harsh shadows across the peaceful property. Jake counted at least 8 men as they emerged from the vehicles, all wearing expensive suits that couldn't quite hide the bulges of concealed weapons. The man who stepped forward was clearly Marcus Steele, tall, silver-haired, with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. His eyes swept over the scene, taking in Jake's presence with obvious displeasure. "Chief Blackhorse," Steele said, his voice carrying a false friendliness that fooled no one. "I hope you'll forgive the late hour, but I was concerned about Ayana. I heard she'd gone missing." "My daughter is safe, Mr. Steele. Thank you for your concern." Steele's eyes moved to Jake. "And you are?" "Jake Morrison." "I see. And what brings you to tribal land this evening, Mr. Morrison?" Jake could feel the tension in the air, could sense that every word mattered here. "I was fishing down by the bayou when I heard someone calling for help." "How fortunate," Steele said, though his tone suggested he found it anything but fortunate. "I don't suppose you saw anything else while you were... You fishing? Like what?" "Like my men, who've been searching for Miss Blackhorse all evening. They reported seeing someone matching her description near the swamp." Jake kept his expression neutral. "I saw a woman who'd fallen into the water. I helped her out and brought her home. That's all." Steele stepped closer, and Jake could smell expensive cologne mixed with something else. The scent of a man who was used to intimidating people. "Mr. Morrison, I'm going to be direct with you. Miss Blackhorse and I have an understanding, a business arrangement, you might say. I'd hate for there to be any complications." "What kind of complications?" "The kind that happen when outsiders interfere in matters that don't concern them." Jake felt something cold settle in his chest, something he hadn't felt in 3 years. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Steele?" "I'm simply explaining the situation. Ayanna will be my wife. It's already been decided. Anyone who tries to interfere with that arrangement will find themselves facing serious consequences." Chief Blackhorse stepped forward. "Mr. Steele, my daughter has not agreed to marry you. She's asked for time to consider your proposal." "Time's up," Steele said flatly. "I've been patient, but my patience has limits. I want an answer tonight." "Then you'll have to wait until tomorrow," came a clear voice from the house. Everyone turned to see Ayanna standing on the porch, having changed into clean clothes, but still showing the effects of her ordeal in the swamp. She looked directly at Steele, her chin raised defiantly. "Miss Blackhorse," Steele said, his voice taking on a different tone, smoother, more dangerous. "I'm glad to see you're safe. We need to talk." "We have nothing to discuss tonight." "I think we do." Steele gestured to his men, and Jake noticed them shifting positions, surrounding the area more completely. That's when Jake made his decision. "Mr. Steele," he said quietly, stepping between the casino owner and the porch where Ayanna stood. "I think the lady's been clear. She's not interested in talking tonight." Steele's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Morrison, I strongly suggest you step aside. And I strongly suggest you and your men get back in your vehicles and leave." The silence that followed was thick with tension. Jake could feel Chief Blackhorse and his men ready to move, could sense Ayanna's eyes on him from the porch. But mostly, he could feel something awakening in himself that he'd thought was buried forever. "You're making a mistake," Steele said softly. "Wouldn't be the first time." Steele studied Jake for a long moment, clearly trying to decide how far he was willing to push things. Finally, he stepped back. "This isn't over," he said to Chief Blackhorse. "I'll be back tomorrow for my answer, and next time I suggest you make sure there are no distractions." As Steele and his men climbed back into their SUVs, Jake felt Ayanna move up beside him. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Don't thank me yet," Jake replied, watching the taillights disappear into the darkness. "Something tells me this is just the beginning." Chief Blackhorse approached them, his expression grave. "Mr. Morrison, by standing up to Steele, you've made yourself a target. He's not a man who forgives or forgets." Jake nodded. "I figured as much." "Then why did you do it?" Jake looked at Ayanna, then back at the chief. "Because some things are worth fighting for." As they stood there in the humid Louisiana night, none of them could have imagined that by dawn 147 warriors would be riding toward them, ready for a battle that would change all their lives forever. The chief gestured toward the house. "Come inside, both of you. We have much to discuss and very little time." As they walked toward the warm light spilling from the windows, Jake caught Ayanna's hand briefly. "Are you okay?" he asked. She squeezed his fingers gently. "I am now." But even as she said it, Ayanna couldn't shake the feeling that the real danger was just beginning. Marcus Steele wasn't a man who accepted defeat gracefully, and she'd seen something in his eyes tonight that terrified her more than the swamp ever could. Inside the house, Chief Blackhorse led them to a large room decorated with traditional Native American art and modern furniture. Several other tribal members were already there, including an elderly woman who Jake sensed held significant authority. "This is my mother, Elena Blackhorse," the chief said. "She's our tribal elder and Ayana's grandmother." Eleanor studied Jake with sharp, intelligent eyes. "So you're the one who saved my granddaughter." "I just happened to be in the right place at the right time, ma'am." Eleanor smiled. "In our tradition, there's no such thing as coincidence. Everything happens for a reason." As they settled into chairs around a large wooden table, Chief Blackhorse spread out what looked like maps and documents. "Mr. Morrison, before we go any further, I need to know exactly who you are. Steele will be investigating you by morning, and I need to know what he'll find." Jake was quiet for a moment, considering how much to reveal. "I was in the military for 12 years, Special Forces. After that, I worked private security for a while. When I met Sarah, I left that life behind and bought the ranch." "What kind of private security?" Elena asked shrewdly. "The kind that kept bad people from hurting good people." Chief Blackhorse nodded slowly. "I thought as much. The way you carried yourself tonight, the way you assessed the situation, that's not something you learn from ranching." "It's not something I wanted to use again," Jake said honestly. Ayana leaned forward. "But you will, if you have to." Jake met her eyes. "If it means protecting innocent people from men like Steele, yes. Then we need to tell you everything," Chief Blackhorse said. "Because this situation is more complicated than you know." Over the next hour, Jake learned about Marcus Steele's true intentions. The casino owner wasn't just interested in marrying Ayana for political influence. He was after the mineral rights to tribal land that contained significant oil deposits. Marriage to the chief's daughter would give him legal standing to challenge the tribe's sovereignty over those lands. "He's been pressuring other tribes across the region," Elena explained, "using a combination of legal challenges, economic pressure, and, when necessary, violence." "How much violence?" Jake asked. 3 tribal leaders have died in accidents over the past 2 years, Chief Blackhorse said grimly. All of them were opposing Steele's expansion plans. Jake felt his jaw tighten. "And the authorities?" "Steele has connections in state government, federal agencies, even some law enforcement. Investigations get buried, witnesses disappear. So you're on your own." "We've been on our own for centuries, Mr. Morrison. We're used to it." Ayana had been quiet during most of this conversation, but now she spoke up. "What we're not used to is having someone from outside our community willing to stand with us." "Which brings us to the real question," Chief Blackhorse said. "What happens next? Steele will be back tomorrow, and he won't be as restrained as he was tonight." Jake stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the peaceful tribal lands. In the distance, he could see lights from other houses, families going about their evening routines, unaware that their entire way of life was under threat. "How many fighting men do you have?" he asked. "Maybe 20 who are truly ready for serious conflict. But Mr. Morrison, we can't win a war against Steele. He has too many resources, too many connections." Jake turned back to face them. "Maybe you can't win a war, but you might be able to win a battle." What do you mean?" "Steele's strength comes from operating in the shadows, using intimidation and corruption. But if you could force him into the open, make his actions public, you might be able to turn his own tactics against him." Elena leaned forward with interest. "Go on." "He wants to marry Ayana to legitimize his claim to your lands. What if we gave him what he wants, but on your terms?" Ayana's eyes widened. "You're suggesting I actually marry him?" "I'm suggesting we make him think you're going to marry him, set up a ceremony, invite media, make it a public event. Then, when he's committed and exposed, we reveal his true intentions." Chief Blackhorse was quiet for a long moment. "It's dangerous. If something goes wrong..." "If we do nothing, you lose everything anyway," Jake pointed out. "At least this way you're fighting back." "And what about you?" Ayana asked. "Where do you fit into this plan?" Jake looked at her, seeing the intelligence and courage that had first caught his attention in the swamp. "I'll be wherever you need me to be." The room fell silent as everyone considered the implications of Jake's proposal. Finally, Elena spoke. "There's something else you should know, Mr. Morrison. Our traditions speak of times when the spirits send help from unexpected places. Tonight, when you pulled my granddaughter from that swamp, you became part of our story. I'm not sure I understand. In our culture, when someone saves a life, they become responsible for that life. But it works both ways. That person also becomes family." Jake felt something shift inside him, something he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death. "Ma'am, I'm honored, but I'm not sure I'm the right person for this." "The spirits don't make mistakes," Elena said firmly, "and neither do I." As the evening wore on, they refined their plan. Ayana would send word to Steele that she was ready to discuss marriage, but only if he agreed to a traditional ceremony that would be open to media and tribal members from across the region. The publicity would make it difficult for him to use his usual intimidation tactics. "He'll be suspicious," Chief Blackhorse warned. "Let him be suspicious," Jake said. "Suspicious men make mistakes. And if he refuses the public ceremony, then we know he's planning something violent and we prepare accordingly." As the meeting broke up, Ayana walked Jake to his truck. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. "You've already done more than enough." Jake looked at her in the moonlight, seeing not just her beauty but her strength, her intelligence, her fierce love for her people. "Ayana, 3 years ago, I lost the most important person in my life. Since then, I've been just existing. Tonight, for the first time since Sarah died, I feel like I have a purpose again." "And what purpose is that?" "Making sure you get to choose your own future." Ayana stepped closer, and Jake caught the faint scent of her perfume mixed with the lingering smell of swamp water. "What if my choice involves you?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with possibilities and complications. Jake felt his heart rate increase, felt something awakening that he'd thought was dead forever. "Then we'll deal with that when the time comes," he said softly. As Jake drove home through the dark Louisiana countryside, he couldn't stop thinking about everything that had happened. This morning, he'd been a lonely widower living quietly on his ranch. Tonight, he was planning to take on one of the most dangerous men in the state to protect a woman he'd just met. Sarah would have called it crazy. She also would have been proud of him for doing it. Back at the tribal lands, Ayana stood on her porch long after Jake's taillights had disappeared, thinking about the strange turns her life had taken in just one day. This morning, she'd been facing an impossible choice between her freedom and her people's safety. Tonight, she had hope for the first time in months. But she also had something else. Feelings for a man she barely knew, feelings that were both thrilling and terrifying. Inside the house, Chief Blackhorse and Eleanor were having their own conversation. "Do you think he'll stay when this is over?" Elena asked. "I think that depends on Ayana," the chief replied. "But I'll tell you this, I haven't seen her look at anyone the way she looked at him tonight." "And him?" Chief Blackhorse smiled. "He's fighting it, but he's already lost that battle. He just doesn't know it yet." As dawn approached, none of them could have imagined that Marcus Steele was already making phone calls, calling in favors, and assembling a force that would test everyone's courage and commitment. The battle for Ayana's freedom and for the future of the tribal lands was about to begin. Don't miss what happens next in this incredible story. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. Give this video a thumbs up to help us reach more viewers, and tell us in the comments. Do you think Jake and Ayana's plan will work? Or is Marcus Steele too powerful to defeat? Your engagement helps us bring you more amazing stories like this one. Hit that subscribe button now and become part of our storytelling family. Jake's phone rang at 5:30 in the morning, jolting him from the first peaceful sleep he'd had in months. The caller ID showed Chief Blackhorse's number, and Jake's blood immediately ran cold. They took her. The chief's voice was tight with controlled fury. Steele's men grabbed Ayanna from her morning run, left a message saying, "If we want her back, I need to sign over the mineral rights by noon today." Jake was already pulling on his boots, his mind shifting into tactical mode. Any witnesses? My nephew saw the whole thing from a distance. 3 vehicles, at least 8 men. They were waiting for her at the old bridge on Cypress Creek Road. Professional job? Very professional. They knew her routine, knew exactly where to position themselves. Jake grabbed his keys and headed for the door. "I'm on my way." "Jake, there's something else." They left one of their men behind to deliver the message. He's not in good shape. 20 minutes later, Jake stood in Chief Blackhorse's living room, looking down at a man who'd clearly been beaten severely. The message was clear. This is what happens to people who cross Marcus Steele. "He's been asking for you specifically," Elena said quietly. "Says Steele wants to meet with you." Jake knelt beside the injured man. "What's the message?" The man's swollen eyes focused on Jake with difficulty. "Steele says to tell the Cowboy that this is what happens when outsiders interfere. He wants you at the old Riverside Casino at 10 o'clock. Come alone, or the girl dies." "It's a trap," Chief Blackhorse said immediately. "Of course it's a trap," Jake replied, but his mind was already working through possibilities. "The question is, what kind of trap?" Elena handed Jake a cup of coffee, her weathered hands steady despite the crisis. "In our tradition, when someone threatens the family, the whole tribe responds. Ma'am, with respect, Steele is counting on that. He wants you to come charging in so he can claim self-defense when he starts shooting. Then what do you suggest?" Jake was quiet for a moment, thinking about the old Riverside Casino. He'd driven past it many times. A run-down building on the banks of the Mississippi, officially closed, but rumored to be where Steele conducted his more questionable business dealings. "I suggest we give him exactly what he wants, but not the way he expects it." Over the next 2 hours, Jake outlined a plan that was either brilliant or suicidal, depending on your perspective. He would go to the meeting as requested, but Chief Blackhorse and his men would already be in position around the casino. More importantly, they'd have backup that Steele would never see coming. "You're talking about a coordinated assault on a fortified position," Chief Blackhorse said. "My men are brave, but they're not soldiers. They don't need to be soldiers. They just need to be in the right place at the right time." Jake spread a hand-drawn map of the casino and surrounding area on the table. "Steele's going to have men positioned here, here, and here," he said, marking strategic points. "He'll keep Ayanna somewhere in the main building, probably the old poker room in the back. It's got only one entrance, easy to defend." "How do you know all this?" "Because it's what I would do." Elena studied the map carefully. "And how do we get past his defenses?" Jake smiled grimly. "We don't go past them. We go through them." At 9:30, Jake pulled into the parking lot of the Riverside Casino, noting the positions of Steele's vehicles and the subtle movements that indicated armed men in concealment. His truck was the only vehicle in the customer parking area, exactly as Steele had intended. The casino itself was a monument to faded dreams, peeling paint, broken neon signs, and windows that had been boarded up for years. But Jake could see that it was far from abandoned. Fresh tire tracks, recently installed security cameras, and the faint hum of generators told a different story. As Jake walked toward the main entrance, his phone buzzed with a text message. "She's alive. For now. Come to the poker room. Alone." Jake pushed through the heavy glass doors into what had once been the casino's main floor. Slot machines sat covered in dust sheets, and the carpet was stained and worn. But the building's bones were solid, and Jake could see why Steele had chosen it as a base of operations. Mr. Morrison, Steele's voice echoed from somewhere in the back of the building. So good of you to join us. Please, follow the lights. A series of small LED lights had been placed on the floor, creating a path toward the rear of the casino. Jake followed them, his senses alert for any sign of danger, his hand resting casually near the concealed pistol he'd strapped to his ankle. The poker room was exactly where Jake had expected it to be, and exactly as he'd described to Chief Blackhorse. One entrance, thick walls, and no windows. Steele had positioned himself behind the old dealer's table, with Ayanna sitting in a chair beside him. Her hands were zip-tied behind her back, but Jake could see she was unharmed. "Ayanna," Jake said quietly, "are you okay?" "I'm fine," she replied, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "But Jake, you shouldn't have come." "Touching," Steele interrupted. "Really, it's like something out of a movie. The heroic cowboy rides to the rescue of the beautiful maiden." Jake counted at least 6 armed men positioned around the room, all with clear lines of fire to where he stood. Professional positioning, professional weapons. These weren't casino security guards, they were military contractors. "What do you want, Steele?" "What I've always wanted. The mineral rights to tribal land. But you've complicated things, Mr. Morrison. You've made this personal. It was already personal when you started threatening innocent people." Steele laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Innocent? Mr. Morrison, there's nothing innocent about what's happening here. This is business, pure and simple. I need those mineral rights, and Chief Blackhorse's daughter is my leverage. And if he signs them over, then everyone goes home happy. Well, everyone except you." Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Meaning?" "Meaning you've seen too much, know too much. You're what we call a loose end." Ayanna's eyes widened with alarm, but Jake kept his expression neutral. "So this was never about letting her go?" "Oh, I'll let her go. Right after she marries me and legitimizes my claim to those lands. But you, Mr. Morrison, you're going to have an unfortunate accident on your way home." Jake nodded slowly, as if accepting his fate. "I figured as much." "Did you? Then why did you come?" "Because sometimes doing the right thing is more important than staying alive." Steele studied Jake for a moment, clearly trying to decide if he was dealing with a fool or something more dangerous. "You know, I've done some research on you since last night. Jake Morrison, former Special Forces, decorated veteran, widowed rancher, quite an impressive resume. Not impressive enough to keep my wife alive. No, but impressive enough to make me wonder why a man with your skills is living quietly on a small ranch in Louisiana." Jake shrugged. "Some of us just want to be left alone. And yet here you are, very much not alone." Before Jake could respond, his phone buzzed with a text message. Steele gestured for one of his men to check it. "It's from Chief Blackhorse," the man reported. "Says he's ready to sign the papers." Steele smiled triumphantly. "Excellent. You see, Mr. Morrison, this is how business gets done. Everyone gets what they want. Except Ayanna. Ayanna will learn to appreciate the benefits of being married to a successful businessman." Jake saw Ayanna's jaw tighten with anger, saw the fire in her eyes that reminded him why he'd been willing to risk everything for her. "There's just one problem with your plan," Jake said quietly. "And what's that?" "You assumed I came alone." Steele's expression shifted slightly. "You did come alone. My men have been watching the entire area. Your men have been watching the roads and the obvious approach routes. They haven't been watching the river." As if on cue, the sound of breaking glass echoed from somewhere else in the building, then another. Then the distinctive sound of smoke grenades being deployed. "What the hell?" one of Steele's men started to say, but Jake was already moving. In one fluid motion, Jake dove behind an overturned poker table, drew his concealed weapon, and put 2 round center mass into the nearest gunman. The room erupted into chaos as Steele's men tried to figure out where the new threat was coming from. "Secure the girl!" Steele shouted, but Ayanna was already moving, having somehow freed herself from the zip ties during the confusion. Jake laid down covering fire as Ayanna rolled behind another table, then systematically began taking out Steele's men with the precision that had made him one of the military's most effective operators. "This isn't possible," Steele snarled, firing wildly in Jake's direction. "My men had the entire perimeter secured." "Your men were watching for an attack from land," Jake replied, dropping another gunman with a carefully placed shot. "They weren't expecting Chief Blackhorse's people to come up from the river." The sound of gunfire was now coming from throughout the building as tribal warriors engaged Steele's security force. Jake had been right about one thing. They didn't need to be soldiers. They just needed to be in the right place at the right time. "Ayanna!" Jake called out. "The back exit. I'm not leaving without you. Go, I'll be right behind you." But as Jake moved to follow her, Marcus Steele stepped into his path, a large caliber pistol in his hand. "I don't think so, Cowboy. You've cost me too much already." Jake found himself looking down the barrel of Steele's gun, calculating angles and distances, knowing he was a split second away from death. That's when the poker room's main door exploded inward, and Chief Blackhorse appeared with 3 of his warriors, their weapons trained on Steele. "Drop it," the chief commanded. For a moment, Steele hesitated, clearly weighing his options. Then, with the desperate fury of a man who'd lost everything, he swung his weapon toward Ayanna. Jake didn't think. He launched himself across the room, tackling Steele just as the casino owner pulled the trigger. The bullet went wide, shattering an old neon beer sign on the wall. The 2 men hit the floor hard, fighting for control of the weapon. Steele was younger and desperate, but Jake had experience and training on his side. After a brief, violent struggle, Jake managed to pin Steele to the floor, the gun skittering away across the worn carpet. "It's over," Jake said, breathing hard. Steele glared up at him with pure hatred. "You have no idea what you've done. I have connections, resources." "This isn't over." "Yeah, it is," Chief Blackhorse said, approaching with zip ties, because this time everything was recorded. Jake looked up in surprise to see Elena Blackhorse standing in the doorway with a video camera, having captured everything from Steele's confession to the gunfight. "In our tradition," Elena said with a slight smile, "we believe in preserving important moments for future generations." As tribal police and federal agents, apparently Chief Blackhorse had more connections than Steele had realized. Took Steele and his remaining men into custody, Jake found himself sitting on the casino steps with Ayanna, both of them trying to process what had just happened. "Is it really over?" Ayanna asked. "The immediate threat is over," Jake replied. "But Steele was right about one thing. He does have connections. There might be legal challenges, political pressure." "We'll face those when they come," Chief Blackhorse said, joining them on the steps. "Right now, I'm more interested in what happens next between you two." Jake and Ayanna looked at each other, both suddenly aware that the crisis that had brought them together was over, and now they had to figure out what that meant for their future. "I should probably get back to my ranch," Jake said quietly. "Give you time to get your life back to normal." "What if I don't want normal?" Ayanna asked. "What do you want?" Ayanna was quiet for a moment, looking out at the Mississippi River, where tribal boats were still patrolling, making sure no other threats were approaching. "I want to help my people rebuild and strengthen our community. I want to make sure what happened with Steele never happens again." "That sounds like a full-time job." "It is. But I also want—" She paused, looking directly at Jake. "I want to see where this goes. Whatever this is between us." Jake felt his heart rate increase, felt the same mixture of hope and fear he'd experienced the night before. "Ayanna, I'm 52 years old. I'm set in my ways. I have baggage, and I live on a ranch in the middle of nowhere. And I'm the daughter of a tribal chief. I have responsibilities to my people, and my life is anything but simple." "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe we're both overthinking this." Chief Blackhorse cleared his throat. If I may offer some perspective from someone who's been married for 35 years, love isn't about finding someone who makes your life easier. It's about finding someone who makes your life worth living. Jake looked at Ayanna, seeing not just her beauty but her strength, her intelligence, her fierce loyalty to her family and community. He thought about Sarah, about what she would have wanted for him, about the conversation they'd had just before she died, when she'd made him promise not to spend the rest of his life alone. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay? Okay, let's see where this goes." Ayanna smiled, the first genuine, unguarded smile Jake had seen from her since they'd met. "Really? Really? But I have one condition." "What's that?" "Next time you go for a morning run, you take backup." Ayanna laughed, and the sound was like music to Jake's ears. "Deal." As they sat there on the steps of the old casino, watching federal agents process the crime scene and tribal members celebrate their victory, Jake felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years, hope for the future. "So what happens now?" he asked. "Now we take things one day at a time," Ayanna replied. "But Jake?" "Yeah? Thank you for everything. Thank you for giving me a reason to fight again." As the sun climbed higher over the Louisiana landscape, Jake Morrison realized that sometimes the most important journeys begin with a single act of courage. Yesterday, he'd been a lonely widower, living quietly on his ranch. Today, he was part of something bigger, a community, a cause, and maybe, if he was very lucky, a love story that was just beginning. But even as they celebrated their victory over Marcus Steele, none of them could have imagined that word of their success was already spreading through networks of tribal communities across the region. By dawn the next day, something unprecedented would be happening, something that would test their newfound happiness and change their lives forever. The real adventure was just beginning. The sound that woke Jake at dawn wasn't his alarm clock or his phone. It was the rhythmic thunder of hoofbeats on hard-packed earth, growing louder by the minute. He rolled out of bed, grabbed his jeans, and moved to the window of his ranch house, expecting to see maybe a few stray cattle that had broken through a fence. What he saw instead made him question whether he was still dreaming. Riders were approaching from the east, silhouetted against the rising sun, like something out of an old Western movie. But as they drew closer, Jake could see these weren't cowboys or casual horsemen. These were Native American warriors in traditional dress, their horses decorated with ceremonial paint and feathers, moving with the kind of precision that spoke of serious purpose. Jake's phone rang, and Chief Blackhorse's voice was filled with an emotion Jake couldn't quite identify, somewhere between awe and concern. "Jake, are you seeing this? I'm seeing riders heading toward my ranch. Please tell me they're friendly." "They're more than friendly. Word of what happened yesterday has spread through tribal networks across 7 states. These are warriors coming to honor what you did for Ayanna, what you did for all of us." Jake counted the riders as they approached his property line. 20, 30, 40. The numbers kept growing as more emerged from the tree line. "Chief, how many people are we talking about here?" Current count is 147 warriors from 12 different tribes. Cherokee, Choctaw, Seminole, Creek, Chickasaw, and others. Some of them have been riding all night to get here. Jake felt his stomach drop. This is about more than just rescuing Ayanna, isn't it? Much more. Marcus Steele wasn't just threatening our tribe, Jake. He's been systematically targeting native communities across the region, using the same tactics he tried on us. What you helped us do yesterday, standing up to him, exposing him, it's given hope to people who thought they had no choice but to submit. The lead riders had reached Jake's front gate now, and he could see they were led by a woman who carried herself with unmistakable authority. She was perhaps 60 years old, with silver-streaked hair braided with eagle feathers, and she rode a magnificent black stallion that seemed to dance rather than walk. "Who's the woman in front?" Jake asked. "That's Chief Maria Strongbear of the Cherokee Nation. She's one of the most respected leaders in the Southeast. If she's here personally, this is bigger than I thought." Jake pulled on a shirt and boots, his mind racing. "Chief, I appreciate the honor, but I'm not sure what these people expect from me. They expect you to be the man who stood up to Marcus Steele when no one else would. They expect you to be the outsider who proved that not all white men are enemies of Native people. And what do you expect?" There was a long pause before Chief Blackhorse answered. "I expect you to be yourself, Jake. That's all any of us can do." By the time Jake made it outside, the warriors had formed a large semicircle in front of his house, their horses perfectly still, their riders silent and watchful. The morning air was filled with the scent of leather, horse sweat, and something else. The unmistakable feeling of history being made. Chief Strongbear dismounted and approached Jake, her movements graceful despite her age. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Jake Morrison, Chief Strongbear, this is unexpected." "I imagine it is. May I speak plainly?" "Please do. What you did yesterday wasn't just about saving one woman or stopping one bad man. You stood with us when you had nothing to gain and everything to lose. In our culture, that makes you family." Jake looked out at the assembled warriors, seeing faces from across the spectrum of Native American heritage, all united by something he was only beginning to understand. "Ma'am, I'm honored, but I'm not sure I understand what's happening here." "What's happening here is a calling, Mr. Morrison. For too long, our people have been divided, fighting separate battles against the same enemies. Men like Marcus Steele count on that division. They pick us off one tribe at a time, one community at a time. And you want to change that? We want to unite, and we want you to help us do it." Jake felt the weight of expectation settling on his shoulders like a heavy blanket. "Chief, I'm just one man. I'm not a leader. I'm not a politician. I'm not—" "You're a warrior," interrupted a new voice. Jake turned to see Ayana approaching on horseback, having ridden over from tribal lands. She was dressed in traditional Native American clothing that took Jake's breath away, a beaded leather dress in earth tones, her long black hair braided with small feathers and silver ornaments. "Ayana," Jake said softly, feeling his heart rate increase just at the sight of her. She dismounted and moved to stand beside Chief Strongbear. "Jake, these warriors didn't come here to ask you to be something you're not. They came here because of what you already are. And what's that? Someone who does the right thing, even when it's dangerous. Someone who protects people who can't protect themselves. Someone who sees injustice and acts to stop it." Chief Strongbear nodded. "Miss Blackhorse speaks truly. We've heard the story of how you saved her from the swamp, how you stood up to Steele's men, how you risked your life for people you barely knew. Any decent person would have done the same." "No," said another voice, and Jake turned to see a tall, imposing man dismounting from a paint horse. Most people would have minded their own business. "This is Chief Robert Windwalker of the Creek Nation," Ayana said quietly. Chief Windwalker approached Jake, his weathered face serious. "Mr. Morrison, I've been fighting men like Marcus Steele for 20 years. I've seen good people, white people, black people, Native people stand by and do nothing while our communities were destroyed because they didn't want to get involved. But you got involved," Chief Strongbear added. "And because you got involved, Steele is in federal custody. His network is being investigated. And for the first time in years, our people have hope." Jake looked around at the assembled warriors, feeling overwhelmed by the responsibility they seemed to be placing on him. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "We're asking you to help us coordinate our resistance," Chief Strongbear said. "You have military experience, tactical knowledge, and most importantly, you've proven you can be trusted." "Coordinate resistance against what?" "Against all the Marcus Steeles," Chief Windwalker said grimly. "Against the corporations trying to steal our land. The politicians trying to eliminate our sovereignty, the criminals trying to exploit our people. Ayana stepped closer to Jake. They're not asking you to fight our battles for us, Jake. They're asking you to help us fight our battles together, as allies. Jake was quiet for a long moment, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. 2 days ago, he'd been a man with no purpose beyond maintaining his ranch and avoiding human contact. Now he was being asked to help coordinate a resistance movement across multiple states. I need to understand something, he said finally. This isn't just about Marcus Steele, is it? This is about something much bigger. Chief Strongbear smiled for the first time since arriving. Now you're beginning to see the real picture. Over the next hour, as the morning sun climbed higher and the assembled warriors dismounted to rest their horses, Jake learned about a network of threats that made Marcus Steele look like a small-time operator. There was the mining company in Oklahoma that was using legal loopholes to claim mineral rights on tribal land. The casino corporation in Mississippi that was bribing state officials to revoke tribal gaming licenses. The development company in Alabama that was building luxury resorts on sacred burial grounds. All of these operations have one thing in common, Chief Windwalker explained, as they gathered around a large map spread on Jake's porch table. They're backed by the same investment group, run by the same kind of men who think native people are obstacles to be removed rather than human beings with rights. And they're all connected, Ayana added. Steele wasn't working alone. He was part of a larger conspiracy to systematically strip native communities of their land, their resources, and their sovereignty. Jake studied the map, seeing patterns that his military training had taught him to recognize. This is a coordinated campaign. They're hitting multiple targets simultaneously to prevent organized resistance. Exactly, Chief Strongbear said, which is why we need to coordinate our response. But why me? You have experienced leaders, people who understand native culture and politics better than I ever could. Because you're an outsider, said a new voice. Jake turned to see an elderly man approaching, supported by a walking stick, but moving with dignity and purpose. This is Elder Joseph Crowfeather, Ayana said respectfully. He's 93 years old and has been fighting for native rights since before I was born. Elder Crowfeather studied Jake with sharp, intelligent eyes. Young man, do you know why we need an outsider to help coordinate our resistance? No, sir. Because our enemies expect us to fight the way we've always fought. Tribe by tribe, community by community, using traditional methods and traditional thinking. They don't expect us to work with someone who thinks like they do. You mean like a soldier? I mean like a white soldier who's chosen to stand with us instead of against us. That makes you something they've never encountered before, something they don't know how to fight. Jake felt the weight of history in the old man's words, felt the accumulated pain and hope of generations of native people who'd been fighting for survival and dignity. Elder Crowfeather, I'm honored by your confidence, but I have to ask, what happens if we fail? What happens if this resistance movement just makes things worse for your people? The old man smiled, and Jake saw a lifetime of wisdom in his weathered features. Son, things are already as bad as they can get. We're fighting for our very existence. The only question is whether we fight together or separately. And if we fight together, then maybe, for the first time in 500 years, we have a real chance to win. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of vehicles approaching. Jake looked up to see a convoy of black SUVs turning into his driveway, and his blood immediately ran cold. Everyone stay calm, he said quietly, his hand moving instinctively toward his concealed weapon. But as the vehicles stopped and their occupants emerged, Jake realized these weren't Steele's men or any other threat. These were federal agents, and they were led by a woman Jake recognized from news reports, FBI Director Sarah Chen. Mr. Morrison, Director Chen said as she approached, I apologize for the intrusion, but we need to talk. Jake looked around at the assembled warriors, then back at the FBI director. About what? About Marcus Steele, about the investigation his arrest has triggered, and about the fact that you and your friends here have stumbled into the middle of the largest organized crime investigation in the Bureau's history. The silence that followed was deafening. Jake could feel the tension radiating from the assembled warriors, could see hands moving toward weapons, could sense that the situation was about to explode into violence. "Director Chen," Jake said carefully, "these people are here as my guests. They're not involved in any criminal activity." "I know exactly why they're here, Mr. Morrison, and I'm not here to arrest anyone. I'm here to ask for your help." Chief Strongbear stepped forward. "What kind of help?" Director Chen looked around at the assembled warriors, clearly impressed despite herself by the show of unity and strength. "The kind of help that could bring down a criminal network that's been operating for over a decade, stealing billions of dollars from native communities across the country." Jake felt his pulse quicken. "You're saying Steele was part of something bigger?" "I'm saying Marcus Steele was a small fish in a very large pond, and thanks to the evidence you helped us gather yesterday, we now have a chance to drain that pond completely. What do you need from us?" Director Chen smiled grimly. "We need you to keep doing exactly what you're doing. We need you to keep fighting back, keep exposing these criminals, keep making them desperate enough to make mistakes. You want us to be bait. I want you to be yourselves, but with federal backing, federal resources, and federal protection." Elder Crow Feather stepped forward, his walking stick tapping against the porch boards. "Young lady, my people have heard promises from the federal government before. Why should we trust you now?" Director Chen met the old man's gaze steadily. "Because this time you have something we've never had before. Leverage. You have evidence, you have public support, and you have a coordinated resistance movement that's already proven it can win. And what do you have? We have the resources to turn your resistance movement into something that can change the entire system." Jake looked around at the assembled warriors, seeing hope and skepticism warring in their faces. This was the moment that would determine not just their immediate future, but the future of native communities across the region. "Director Chen," Jake said finally, "if we agree to work with you, what guarantees do we have that the federal government won't just use us to clean up this mess and then abandon us like they have so many times before?" "You have my word." "With respect, ma'am, that's not enough." Director Chen nodded slowly. "Then what would be enough?" Jake looked at Ayanna, saw her nod almost imperceptibly, saw the trust in her eyes that gave him the courage to make a decision that would change all their lives. "We want a formal partnership agreement. We want native communities to have a permanent voice in federal law enforcement operations that affect tribal lands. And we want guarantees that this investigation will lead to systemic changes, not just individual prosecutions." "That's a tall order, Mr. Morrison." "It's a fair order, and it's non-negotiable." Director Chen was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing her options. Finally, she smiled. "Mr. Morrison, I think this is the beginning of a very interesting partnership." As the federal agents and tribal leaders began discussing the details of their unprecedented alliance, Jake found himself standing apart with Ayanna, both of them trying to process the magnitude of what was happening. "Are you okay with this?" Ayanna asked quietly. "Are you?" I think this is what we've been fighting for all along. A chance to change the system instead of just surviving it." Jake nodded, looking out at the assembled warriors who'd ridden through the night to honor him, at the federal agents who were offering resources he'd never dreamed of, at the woman beside him who'd somehow become the center of his world in just 2 days. "Ayanna, there's something I need to tell you." "What?" "When I pulled you out of that swamp, I thought I was just saving one person. I had no idea I was starting a revolution." Ayanna smiled, taking his hand in hers. "Maybe that's what makes you the right person to lead it. I'm not leading anything. We're all in this together. "Yes," she said softly, "we are." As the sun climbed higher over the Louisiana landscape, Jake Morrison realized that his quiet life as a widowed rancher was officially over. In its place was something he'd never expected, a purpose that was bigger than himself, a community that had adopted him as family, and a love that was growing stronger with each passing hour. The battle against Marcus Steele had been just the beginning. The real war was about to start, and this time they wouldn't be fighting alone. But even as they celebrated this unprecedented alliance between federal law enforcement and native communities, none of them could have imagined that their enemies were already adapting, already planning a response that would test every alliance they'd built and every bond they'd formed. The revolution had begun, but the forces of corruption and greed weren't going to surrender without a fight that would shake the foundations of power across the entire region. The next phase of their battle would determine not just the fate of native communities, but the future of justice itself in America. 3 months later, Jake stood on the steps of the federal courthouse in New Orleans, watching as the last of the defendants in what the media had dubbed the Steele conspiracy were led away in handcuffs. 47 arrests, including 3 state senators, 2 federal judges, and the CEO of the largest development corporation in the Southeast. The criminal network that had been systematically stealing from native communities for over a decade was finally broken. But Jake's attention wasn't on the defendants or the celebrating crowd of reporters and activists. His eyes were fixed on Ayanna, who was giving an interview to a national news network about the new federal task force that would protect tribal sovereignty rights. She was radiant in a navy blue suit that somehow managed to honor both her professional role and her cultural heritage, and Jake felt his heart skip the same way it had that first night in the swamp. "Quite a change from 3 months ago," Chief Blackhorse said, joining Jake on the courthouse steps. "That's an understatement," Jake replied, thinking about everything that had happened since that morning when 147 warriors had appeared at his ranch. The federal partnership had exceeded everyone's expectations, leading to the largest recovery of stolen tribal assets in American history. Over $2 billion returned to native communities across 7 states. "Any regrets?" the chief asked. Jake considered the question seriously. His quiet ranch life was gone forever, replaced by a schedule of meetings, investigations, and coordination efforts that kept him traveling constantly. But he was also part of something meaningful now, something that was making a real difference in people's lives. "No regrets," he said finally. "Though I have to admit I never expected to become a federal consultant on Native American affairs." Chief Blackhorse laughed. "I don't think any of us expected our lives to change this dramatically, but change isn't always a bad thing." "Speaking of change," Jake said, watching Ayanna wrap up her interview, "there's something I've been meaning to discuss with you." "I'm listening." Jake took a deep breath, feeling more nervous than he had facing down Marcus Steele's gunman. "I'd like your permission to ask Ayanna to marry me." Chief Blackhorse was quiet for a long moment, and Jake felt his anxiety spike. Then the older man smiled. "Jake, you've already proven yourself to our family and our community in every way that matters. But more importantly, I've watched my daughter these past 3 months, and I've never seen her happier. Is that a yes?" "That's a yes. But you should know, in our tradition, marriage isn't just between 2 people. It's between 2 families. 2 communities." "I understand that, sir, and I'm honored to be considered part of your family." "You've been part of our family since the night you stood up to Steele. The wedding ceremony will just make it official." As they talked, Jake noticed a commotion near the courthouse entrance. Director Chen was emerging with a group of federal prosecutors, all of them looking satisfied with the day's proceedings. "Mr. Morrison," Director Chen called out, approaching with a smile. "Congratulations. This investigation has been the most successful joint operation in Bureau history." "It's been a team effort, Director." Indeed it has, which brings me to something I wanted to discuss with you. We're establishing a permanent task force for crimes against native communities, and we'd like you to head it up. Jake felt his eyebrows rise in surprise. Director, I'm flattered, but I'm not a federal agent. No, but you're something better. You're someone both communities trust. The position would be civilian, but with full federal authority to investigate and coordinate responses to crimes affecting tribal lands. Jake looked over at Ayanna, who had finished her interview and was walking toward them. Can I think about it? Of course, but Jake, this could be your chance to make the changes you've been fighting for permanent. As Director Chen walked away, Ayanna reached Jake's side, slipping her hand into his. What was that about? She asked. I'll tell you later, Jake said, squeezing her fingers gently. Right now I just want to enjoy this moment. They stood together on the courthouse steps, watching as the crowd of supporters began to disperse. Representatives from dozens of tribal communities were heading home with news of victory. Federal agents were celebrating the successful conclusion of a massive investigation, and reporters were filing stories about justice finally being served. It's really over, isn't it? Ayanna said softly. This part is over, Jake replied, but I have a feeling our real adventure is just beginning. What do you mean? Jake turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. Ayanna Blackhorse, 3 months ago, you literally fell into my life and changed everything. You made me remember what it feels like to have a purpose, to be part of something bigger than myself. Jake, let me finish, he said, his voice gentle but determined. I know we've only known each other for 3 months, and I know our lives are complicated, but I also know that I love you. I love your strength, your intelligence, your fierce loyalty to your people. I love the way you challenge me to be better than I thought I could be. Ayanna's eyes widened as Jake dropped to one knee right there on the courthouse steps, pulling a ring from his pocket. A beautiful piece that combined traditional Native American silverwork with a stunning diamond. Ayanna, will you marry me? The courthouse steps fell silent as everyone nearby stopped to watch. Ayanna looked down at Jake, tears streaming down her face, her hands trembling. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes. The crowd erupted in cheers as Jake slipped the ring onto her finger and stood to kiss her. Chief Blackhorse was beaming, Director Chen was applauding, and Elder Crow Feather, who had insisted on attending the trial despite his age, was nodding his approval. When? Ayanna asked breathlessly. Whenever you want, Jake replied, though I should probably mention that Director Chen just offered me a permanent position heading up a federal task force for crimes against native communities. And I told her I'd think about it, but I wanted to talk to you first because if I take the job, it means our lives will be even more complicated than they already are. Ayanna smiled, the same radiant smile that had first captured Jake's heart. Jake Morrison, I fell in love with a man who was willing to risk everything to do what was right. A little complication doesn't scare me. So you think I should take the job? I think you should do whatever feels right to you. But I also think the federal government could use someone who actually cares about justice instead of just politics. Jake kissed her again, feeling a sense of completeness he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death. In that case, I guess I have a phone call to make. 6 months later, Jake and Ayanna were married in a ceremony that blended Native American traditions with contemporary elements, held on tribal land with representatives from dozens of communities in attendance. Director Chen served as an honored guest, along with several federal judges and prosecutors who had worked on the Steele investigation. The wedding made national news, not just because of the unusual love story, but because it symbolized a new era of cooperation between federal law enforcement and Native American communities. Jake's task force had already prevented 3 major land grabs and prosecuted dozens of criminals who had been targeting tribal communities. As they danced their first dance as husband and wife under a canopy of stars, Jake marveled at how much his life had changed since that evening when he'd heard someone calling for help from the Louisiana bayou. "Any regrets?" Ayanna asked, echoing her father's question from months earlier. "Only one," Jake replied. "What's that?" "I regret that it took me 52 years to find you." Ayanna laughed, the sound carrying across the celebration like music. "Well, you found me eventually. And now you're stuck with me. I can think of worse fates." As they continued to dance, surrounded by family and friends from both their worlds, Jake reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. He'd started as a lonely widower, trying to save one woman from drowning. He'd ended up helping to save an entire way of life from destruction. But more than that, he'd found something he'd thought was lost forever. Love, purpose, and a family that had chosen him as much as he'd chosen them. The battle against corruption and injustice would continue. There would always be more Marcus Steels, more threats to overcome, more fights to win. But now Jake knew he wouldn't be fighting alone. He had Ayanna, he had the trust of communities across the region, and he had the resources of the federal government behind him. Most importantly, he had hope for a future where justice wasn't just a word, but a reality that protected everyone, regardless of their background or the color of their skin. As the evening wound down and guests began to head home, Jake and Ayanna stood together on the porch of their new house, a beautiful home that blended his ranch-style preferences with her cultural traditions, built on land that connected his property with tribal territory. "So what happens now?" Ayanna asked, leaning against his shoulder. "Now we live happily ever after," Jake replied. "You really think it's that simple?" Jake looked out at the Louisiana landscape, thinking about all the challenges that still lay ahead, all the work that remained to be done. Then he looked down at his wife, seeing the love and determination in her eyes that had first inspired him to be better than he thought he could be. "No," he said honestly. "I think it's going to be complicated and difficult and sometimes dangerous, but I also think we're going to face it together, and that makes all the difference." Ayanna smiled and kissed him softly. "Together sounds perfect." As they stood there in the warm Louisiana night, Jake Morrison realized that sometimes the most important rescues aren't about pulling someone out of physical danger. Sometimes they're about pulling each other out of loneliness, despair, and the belief that one person can't make a difference. He'd saved Ayanna from the swamp, but she'd saved him from a life without meaning. Together, they'd saved each other and built something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy and the seeds of hope. The lonely, widowed cowboy's story had ended. The story of Jake and Ayanna Morrison, partners in love, life, and the fight for justice, was just beginning. And somewhere in the distance, carried on the night wind, was the sound of horses running free across open land, a reminder that some things are worth fighting for, some bonds are unbreakable, and some love stories are powerful enough to change the world. That's a wrap on this incredible journey of love, courage, and justice. If this story moved you, touched your heart, or kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that subscribe button right now and ring the notification bell so you never miss another amazing story like this one. Drop a comment below and tell us, what was your favorite moment in Jake and Ayanna's story? Which part gave you chills? And what kind of story would you like to see next? Your comments, likes, and shares help us reach more people who love powerful storytelling. So please take just 2 seconds to hit that thumbs up button. It makes a huge difference for our channel. And if you're new here, welcome to our storytelling family. We bring you the most engaging, emotional, and unforgettable stories every week. Subscribe now and become part of a community that believes in the power of love, courage, and standing up for what's right. Don't forget to check out our other incredible stories in the playlist below. And remember, every great love story starts with someone willing to take a risk for a stranger. What risk will you take today? Subscribe now and let's find out together.